The dust of the trail clung to Theodora Blackwell's skirts as she stumbled through the doorway of their homestead, clutching a letter that had just arrived from back east. She could already hear her husband Jeremiah's boots stomping across the wooden floor, his temper as volatile as the summer storms that swept across the Nebraska territory in 1868. 3 years of marriage had taught her to recognize the signs of his rage, but this time she wouldn't cower. Not anymore. "What in tarnation do you think you're doing?" Jeremiah snatched the letter from her trembling fingers, his face contorting with fury as he scanned the contents. "You've been writing to your father behind my back, after I expressly forbade it." Theodora lifted her chin. "He's dying, Jeremiah." "I had a right to know." Jeremiah crumpled the letter in his fist. "You have no rights except those I give you." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Have you forgotten your wedding vows, woman, to honor and obey?" "I haven't forgotten anything," Theodora replied, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Including your promises that we would build something beautiful out here." The back of Jeremiah's hand connected with her cheek before she could react, the force of the blow sending her stumbling against the rough-hewn table. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. "You'll learn respect one way or another." He grabbed her by the shoulders, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "On your knees, Theodora, beg my forgiveness." She stared back at him, the woman she had become in the harsh frontier unrecognizable from the naive Boston socialite who had once believed in love and adventure. "No." Jeremiah's eyes widened in disbelief before narrowing dangerously. "I said kneel." The door crashed open behind them, silhouetting a tall figure against the golden evening light. Theodora recognized the lean form of Samuel Callahan, their nearest neighbor whose cattle ranch bordered their struggling farm. "Everything all right in here?" Samuel's deep voice carried the lazy drawl of Texas, but there was nothing casual about the way his hand rested near the Colt revolver on his hip. "This is between me and my wife," Jeremiah spat. "Get off my property." Samuel's gaze shifted to Theodora, taking in her reddened cheek and the defiance in her eyes. "Madam, this doesn't concern you, Callahan," Jeremiah growled, tightening his grip on Theodora's arms. "My wife needs to learn her place." He shoved her downward. "Kneel, woman." Samuel stepped fully into the cabin, his spurs jingling softly against the floorboards. "I don't believe the lady wants to kneel." "She'll do as she's told," Jeremiah shouted. Samuel moved with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to danger, positioning himself between Theodora and her husband. His voice remained calm but carried an edge of steel when he spoke. "She stands beside me, Blackwell, not on her knees before you or any man." Jeremiah reached for the rifle leaning against the wall, but Samuel was faster, his revolver appearing in his hand as if by magic. "Don't," Samuel warned quietly, the standoff stretched between them taut as a bowstring. Then Jeremiah's shoulders slumped. "Take her then," he muttered. "Worthless piece of Boston trash anyway, never could work worth a damn on a frontier farm." Theodora straightened her back, fighting tears that threatened to spill. "I'll get my things." Samuel nodded, keeping his eyes and his gun trained on Jeremiah as Theodora gathered what little truly belonged to her, a locket with her mother's portrait, a small pouch of coins she'd saved from selling eggs, and the worn copy of Emerson's essays that had sustained her spirit through 3 years of increasing isolation and abuse. "Where will you go?" Jeremiah sneered. "Back east to your dying father." Theodora paused at the door. "That's not your concern anymore." The setting sun painted the prairie in hues of gold and crimson as they left the cabin behind. Samuel helped her onto his horse before swinging up behind her. "My ranch is 5 miles west," he said. "You can stay in my foreman's cabin until you decide what you want to do. He's visiting family in Kansas City for another month." Theodora nodded, too overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events to speak. The gentle rocking motion of the horse beneath them and the solid warmth of Samuel at her back were the only constants in a world suddenly turned upside down. "Thank you," she finally managed as the silhouette of Jeremiah and their cabin disappeared behind them. "But why would you help me?" "You barely know me." Samuel was quiet for a moment. My mother suffered at my father's hands for 15 years before he drank himself to death. No one ever stood up for her. His voice carried the weight of old pain. I swore I'd never turn a blind eye to such things. The full moon illuminated the rolling landscape as they approached Samuel's ranch. Unlike Theodora's humble homestead, Callahan Ranch was a proper operation with a main house, bunkhouse for the hands, stables, and corrals. A few lanterns still glowed in the windows despite the late hour. Boss. A weathered cowhand hurried from the bunkhouse. Wasn't expecting you back tonight. His curious gaze flicked to Theodora. Pete, Mrs. Blackwell needs the foreman's cabin prepared, Samuel said, dismounting and reaching up to help Theodora down. And send Margie from the kitchen with some hot food and fresh water for washing up. The man nodded without question. Yes, sir, right away. Samuel led Theodora to a small but well-built cabin set apart from the main house. It's not fancy, but it's clean and warm. It's perfect, Theodora said, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through confronting Jeremiah was fading, leaving her trembling, Samuel noticed. You're safe now, Mrs. Blackwell. Theodora, she corrected softly. Please call me Theodora or Thea, Mrs. Blackwell feels like someone else now. His smile was gentle. Thea it is then. The next morning, Theodora woke to sunlight streaming through clean curtains. For a moment, she lay disoriented, then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She sat up quickly, wincing at the bruises on her arms where Jeremiah had gripped her. A soft knock at the door startled her. Miss Thea, I've brought breakfast and some fresh clothes that might fit you. The voice belonged to an older woman Theodora hadn't met the night before. Come in, please, she called, hastily smoothing her hair. The door opened to reveal a plump, gray-haired woman carrying a tray and a bundle of fabric. I'm Margie, Mr. Callahan's housekeeper. Been with him since he started this place 5 years ago. Thank you for your kindness, Margie, Theodora said, accepting the tray of hot coffee, scrambled eggs, and freshly baked biscuits. The smell made her realize how hungry she was. Those bruises need some arnica, Margie said matter-of-factly, setting down the clothes. I'll bring some after you've eaten. Mr. Callahan said you're welcome to stay as long as you need, and to tell you he's gone into town but will be back by midday. After Margie left, Theodora ate hungrily, savoring food prepared by someone other than herself for the first time in years. The clothes Margie had brought were simple, but clean, a blue calico dress that must have belonged to someone smaller than Margie herself, but larger than Theodora. With some cinching of the waist, it would do. After washing and dressing, Theodora stepped outside, blinking in the bright sunlight. The Callahan Ranch sprawled before her, a hive of activity. Cowboys moved between corrals, the sound of hammering came from what looked like a blacksmith's forge, and in the distance, a herd of cattle grazed on the rolling grassland. You look better today, said a voice behind her. Theodora turned to find Samuel dismounting from his horse, his tall frame silhouetted against the midday sky. He looked different in the daylight, younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and laugh lines around his eyes. I feel better, she admitted. Thank you again for your intervention. Samuel removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair streaked with gold from the sun. No thanks needed. I've spoken to Sheriff Taylor in town. Jeremiah has no legal right to force you back. Nebraska territory recognizes a woman's right to leave an abusive marriage, though divorce proceedings would need to be filed through the circuit court when Judge Wilson makes his rounds next month. Theodora felt a weight lift from her shoulders. I didn't think I had any options. Everyone has options, Thea, Samuel said gently. They're just not always obvious when you're in the thick of things. He hesitated. I also wired your father in Boston. The telegraph operator in town confirmed the address from your letter. Surprise and gratitude washed over her. You did that for me, Samuel shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. Seemed like the right thing to do. If he's ailing, he should know you're safe. Tears pricked at Theodora's eyes. It had been so long since anyone had shown her such consideration. I don't know how to repay such kindness. No repayment necessary, Samuel insisted, but I could use some help with the ranch accounts if you're willing. My foreman usually handles them, but with him gone. He trailed off with a sheepish smile. I'd be delighted, Theodora said quickly. I managed my father's household accounts before I married Jeremiah. Over the next 2 weeks, Theodora settled into life at Callahan Ranch. Each morning, she would wake early, help Margie with breakfast for the ranch hands, then spend several hours updating the account books in Samuel's study. The work was satisfying, bringing order to the jumbled numbers left by the absent foreman. In the afternoons, she often accompanied Samuel as he rode the boundaries of his property, checking fences and water sources. These rides gave Theodora a new appreciation for the rugged beauty of the Nebraska landscape, so different from the manicured gardens of Boston, yet magnificent in its wild expanse. Samuel proved to be intelligent company, well-read despite his frontier upbringing. They debated politics, literature, and philosophy as they rode side by side across the grasslands. Theodora found herself laughing for the first time in years, the sound strange but welcome to her own ears. "You should do that more often," Samuel remarked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, mugs of coffee warming their hands against the early autumn chill. "Do what?" she asked, glancing at his profile, strong and steady in the fading light. "Laugh," he said simply. "It suits you." Heat rose to Theodora's cheeks and she looked away. "I'd forgotten how." Samuel's hand covered hers briefly, a touch so gentle she might have imagined it. "I'm glad you're remembering." The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Then the dinner bell rang from the main house, breaking the spell. As they rose to go inside, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching fast. Samuel's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "Stay here," he instructed, moving to the edge of the porch. The rider slowed as he approached, and Samuel relaxed slightly. "It's just Pete, back from his scouting route." Pete dismounted in a cloud of dust, his expression grim. "Mr. Callahan, we've got trouble. Jeremiah Blackwell's in town, drunk as a skunk and telling anyone who will listen that you stole his wife. He's gathered a few malcontents who don't much care for your success." Samuel's jaw tightened. "How many?" "5, maybe 6, mostly drifters, but they're armed and heading this way, I'd reckon." Samuel nodded. "Get the men ready. I won't have a fight on my property if I can help it, but we'll be prepared." He turned to Theodora. "You should stay inside with Margie." Theodora straightened her spine. "No, this is my problem, not yours. I won't hide while you face danger on my behalf." "Thea, I'll speak to Jeremiah," she insisted. "Perhaps I can reason with him." Samuel's expression darkened. "Men like that don't reason, especially when they're drunk." "Nevertheless, I won't cower," Theodora said firmly. "I did enough of that during my marriage." Before Samuel could argue further, the sound of approaching horses reached them. Jeremiah and 5 rough-looking men rode into the ranch yard, dust billowing around them. "Callahan," Jeremiah shouted, his words slurring slightly. "Show your face, you wife-stealing bastard." Samuel stepped off the porch, positioning himself between the riders and Theodora. His ranch hands emerged from various buildings, rifles ready but not yet raised. "You're trespassing on private property, Blackwell," Samuel called, his voice level. "Turn around and ride out while you still can." Jeremiah's bloodshot eyes fixed on Theodora. "There's my wayward wife. Come to drag you home, woman." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Theodora replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Our marriage is over, Jeremiah." Jeremiah spat on the ground. "Not until I say it is." "A man has rights, and so does a woman," Samuel countered. "She's made her choice. Respect it and leave." One of Jeremiah's companions, a scraggly bearded man with a vicious scar across one cheek, laughed nastily. "Sounds like you've gone soft over a piece of skirt, Callahan. Maybe we should teach you both a lesson." The tension in the air thickened as hands moved closer to weapons on both sides. Theodora's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to show fear. "There's no need for bloodshed," she said, stepping forward. "Jeremiah, you never wanted me as a wife, only as a servant and a possession. Let me go, and you can find someone better suited to the life you want to lead." Jeremiah's face contorted with rage. "You humiliated me. The whole territory's laughing at the man whose wife ran off with a cowboy." "Nobody's laughing, Blackwell," Samuel said evenly. "Most folks around here mind their own business. You'd be wise to do the same." For a moment, it seemed like violence was inevitable. Then the sheriff's wagon appeared on the horizon, accompanied by several mounted deputies. "Looks like we've got company," Samuel observed mildly. "Sheriff Taylor doesn't take kindly to troublemakers." Jeremiah's companions exchanged uneasy glances. Getting drunk and intimidating a woman was one thing, facing the territorial law was another matter entirely. "This ain't worth hanging for," muttered the scarred man, turning his horse. "Come on, Blackwell, live to fight another day." Jeremiah's face twisted with impotent rage. "This isn't over," he snarled, but he too wheeled his horse around. "You'll regret this, both of you." They galloped away, narrowly avoiding the approaching lawman. Sheriff Taylor, a weathered man with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, reined in his horse. "Everything all right here, Callahan," Samuel nodded. "Thanks to your timely arrival, Sheriff. What brings you out this way?" "Telegraph came for Mrs. Blackwell," the sheriff said, tipping his hat to Theodora. "From Boston. Seemed urgent, so I thought I'd deliver it personally. Good thing I did, by the looks of things." Theodora accepted the folded paper with trembling hands, her thoughts immediately flying to her father. The message was brief but clear. Her father had passed away peacefully 3 days prior. His attorney requested her immediate return to Boston to settle his estate. "Bad news?" Samuel asked softly as she lowered the telegram. "My father," she confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "He's gone." That evening, after the sheriff had departed with promises to keep an eye on Jeremiah, Theodora sat alone on the porch of the foreman's cabin, the telegram clutched in her hand. The grief she felt was complicated sorrow for the father she'd barely known as an adult, regret for the years of estrangement, and guilt that she hadn't been there at the end. Soft footsteps announced Samuel's approach. He carried 2 glasses and a bottle of fine whiskey, a luxury rarely indulged on the frontier. "I thought you might need this," he said, pouring a small measure into each glass and offering one to her. Theodora accepted gratefully. "Thank you." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nebraska sky. Finally, Samuel spoke. "Will you go back to Boston?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Theodora considered carefully before answering. "I suppose I must, at least temporarily. There will be legal matters to attend to, the estate to settle." She paused, studying the amber liquid in her glass. "But I'm not sure Boston is my home anymore. I've changed too much." Samuel's expression remained neutral, but she noticed the slight tightening of his fingers around his glass. "The Nebraska territory has a way of changing people." "It's not just the territory," Theodora said softly. "It's finding my own strength, learning that I can stand on my own 2 feet." She looked directly at him, "And meeting someone who believed I could before I did myself." Their eyes met in the dim light. Samuel set his glass down carefully. "Thea, I don't want to presume anything, but if you were considering where to make your home after Boston." He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Yes," she encouraged. "There's a place for you here if you want it." His voice dropped lower. "With me, if that's something you might consider, in time." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Theodora felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the whiskey spreading through her chest. "Samuel, are you asking what I think you're asking?" He smiled then, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Not properly, not yet. That would be too forward, considering everything you've been through. But I am telling you that I've come to care for you deeply, and I'd like the chance to show you what a partnership between equals could be." Theodora reached out, covering his weathered hand with her own. "I think I'd like that very much." The journey to Boston was long but necessary. Theodora traveled with a letter of credit from Samuel, and the sheriff's assurance that divorce proceedings would begin in her absence. The city of her birth felt simultaneously familiar, and foreign the cobblestone streets and brick buildings, a stark contrast to the wide open spaces of Nebraska. Her father's funeral had already taken place, but she visited his grave, making peace with the complicated man who had been both loving and distant throughout her life. His attorney, Mr. Whitcomb, was surprised but accommodating when Theodora explained her circumstances. "Your father changed his will shortly before his death," Whitcomb explained in his book-lined office. "He left everything to you directly, not to your husband as would be customary. It seems he had reservations about Mr. Blackwell that he never expressed to you." The revelation brought fresh tears to Theodora's eyes. He knew. Somehow he knew. Your father was a shrewd judge of character, Mrs. Blackwell. The estate is substantial. The shipping business alone is worth a considerable fortune. What do you intend to do with it? Theodora considered the question carefully. Sell it, she decided. All except the family home, that I'll keep but lease to a good family who will care for it. Whitcomb raised an eyebrow. May I ask why? This wealth could establish you very comfortably in Boston society once again. Theodora smiled, thinking of wide horizons and star-filled skies. Because I've found something more valuable than Boston society, Mr. Whitcomb. I've found my own strength and a man who values it rather than fears it. The legal matters took nearly 2 months to resolve, during which Theodora received weekly letters from Samuel. His words, straightforward yet tender, sustained her through the complicated process of settling her father's affairs and finalizing her divorce from Jeremiah, which the Nebraska Territorial Court granted in her absence, given the testimony of Sheriff Taylor and others regarding Jeremiah's abusive behavior. When Theodora finally returned to Nebraska Territory in the spring of 1869, she arrived not as a penniless refugee, but as a woman of independent means. The train pulled into the small frontier station, and as she stepped onto the platform, she spotted Samuel immediately, standing tall among the waiting crowd. He removed his hat as she approached, his smile transforming his sun-weathered face. "Welcome back, Thea." "It's good to be back," she replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. They stood for a moment, drinking in the sight of each other after months apart. Then, heedless of the curious onlookers, Samuel took her hand in his. "I promised myself I'd do this properly when you returned," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "Theodora Bennett, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, not as my possession or subordinate, but as my equal partner in all things?" Theodora's heart swelled with joy so intense it bordered on pain. "Yes, Samuel Callahan. Yes, I will." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Callahan Ranch with Margie, the ranch hands, and even Sheriff Taylor in attendance. The bruises from Jeremiah's hands had long since faded, replaced by the gentle touch of a man who believed that a woman's strength complemented his own rather than threatened it. With her inheritance, Theodora and Samuel expanded the ranch, investing in breeding stock and modern equipment. They built a new main house, designed together with both practicality and beauty in mind. A room filled with books became Theodora's particular joy, a library that grew to be known throughout the territory as a place where knowledge was freely shared. One evening, a year after their wedding, they sat on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and purple. Samuel's arm rested comfortably around Theodora's shoulders, his hand occasionally straying to the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew. "Do you ever regret it?" Samuel asked quietly, "leaving Boston and all its comforts for this rough frontier life?" Theodora considered the question, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Not for a single instant," she replied truthfully. "In Boston, I was defined by my relation to others, someone's daughter, someone's wife. Here, I discovered who Theodora really is." Samuel smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And who is she, this Theodora?" She turned to meet his gaze, seeing in his eyes the same respect and love that had given her courage that fateful day when she'd refused to kneel. "She is a woman who stands on her own 2 feet," Theodora said softly, "but chooses to stand beside the man she loves." As darkness fell over the Nebraska prairie, they remained side by side, equals in partnership, bound not by societal constraints but by a love born of mutual respect and shared dreams. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and the Callahan Ranch flourished, they faced each challenge the same way, standing tall together, neither one above nor below the other, but side by side against whatever the frontier might bring.